coaches, and welcome to our member continuing education for April 2019. Our focus today is going to be on execution. My name is Ken Thiessen. I'm going to be your host on this webinar, and I'm coming to you from beautiful Regina, Saskatchewan, up in the prairies of Canada, where we're above freezing today, which is a good thing. Some information, you'll see some information on the screen there about who I am, kind of what I do, and privileged to have with us today, all the way from Chile, Michelle LaVallee, who's going to be talking about top grading. Michelle is a Gravitas Impact alumni. She's been a top grading champion since 2006 and spends her time working with industries across the world and done over 1,000 top grading interviews. And so Michelle, welcome to our webinar today. And with that, I am going to stop sharing my screen and you can share yours and we'll get into your presentation.
Nice. Thank you so much, Ken, and everyone for being on the call today. We're excited about this. I'll go and get my slides on the screen. And I'm just so proud and pleased to be back with the community here. It's been a while since we caught up, so I want to just give a shout out to everyone that I've met and worked with in previous years and say thank you very much for having me back. It's very cool to be here. And as Ken mentioned, I've been top grading for a while. I first started in 2006, where I top graded my first company back in China. Had very good results with that. And when I decided to go out and become an entrepreneur myself, I looked into both top grading and, back then it was the Rockefeller habits, and loved both and still recommend both. The 4 decisions are amazing. I just found in the last 3+ years especially, my clients, their number one challenge continues to be around people and getting people right. So I've dedicated my services and my focus now to almost 100% on top grading. So I'm very pleased to be here today. And we're going to go through a few key takeaways or some of the top 6 things that I think are most important for us as coaches to know about top grading. And then we're going to save plenty of time for some questions towards the end. So I'll just go ahead and get started. And Ken, I'll look to you to interrupt any time. If you'd like me to slow down or if there's questions that come up along the way, just let me know.
And just as we get into that, coaches, if you do have questions, just type them into the chat box and then I will convey the questions to Michelle and we'll get her to respond to your questions as they come in. So yeah, cool. Turn it back to you. Go for it.
All right, good. So I like to begin here with just a reminder about where the practices come from. I'm sure folks, our audience today are very aware of both Top Grading and Who. Both books just are great to recommend to your clients, of course, but Who by Jeff Smart is very much the simpler read. The Top Grading book, the 3rd edition, is kind of the Bible or the big book. But I like both. They're both fantastic. If you've got new clients out there that do have people as a challenge in their strategic planning, for sure, I recommend Who. It's just a great place to get started. And I think most of us also know, but just a brief reminder that Jeff and Brad Smart created Top Grading now I think it's 35+ years ago, after literally thousands upon thousands of companies consulted, over 65,000 case studies done. And it's one of the reasons why I enjoy Top Grading so much today, because these guys came up with something so amazingly accurate all these years past, and all of the tools and the processes that they focus on hold true to this day. It's one of the reasons why, again, I love it, because it works regardless of industry size, culture, language, geography, you name it. So huge fan. Now, when I first was handed these 2 books, I should say the Top Grading book and the DVDs back in 2006, my boss, former CEO and good friend, Bob Boyce, said, "Hey, Michelle, just read this and go make it happen." And I read it and I'm like, this is awesome. And my management team is not going to get it. It's going to be way too overwhelming. Very smart, talented people, but there's a lot going on in these books. And it can seem overwhelming at first, especially if you're helping clients improve their people. And it's important to remember that this is a long game. We're not trying to change everything at once. It is very much a DNA game changer for the company, but it really is important to take the stress off and remember that you should implement it, or your clients should implement it at a pace that works for them. So that's incredibly important to just take it easy, step by step, roll it out in bite-sized chunks, which is what I enjoy doing. But as an operational gal, I've always been in operations, was formerly a COO. And prior to that, was with Microsoft for 8 years, looking after Asia Pacific customer service and tech support. So I was always familiar with all kinds of KPIs. But this quote from Peter Drucker really woke me up when I first got into top grading years back. And that is that the toughest decisions in organizations are all about people, who we hire, who we promote, who we transfer, who we might need to let go. All these decisions are the hardest to unmake. They're so painful to undo, not to mention expensive, and yet they receive the least amount of attention in the organization. It's crazy. So think about this as a starting point for everything else we talk about today. We have KPIs for everything. You know, we've got critical numbers, we've got quarterly priorities, we've got rocks, but we need to be sure that executives and leaders are paying attention to their people decisions and putting measurement around that so that we can make progress along the way. So worldwide conclusions, when you're not using top grading, traditional hiring methods out there, they average 25% A's, 50% B's, and 25% C players. Now, I've personally experienced this in my former company. I see it today. Every time I'm working with clients, it's almost to the decimal point, this breakdown. If you've got 100 people, especially if you're an entrepreneur, if you're starting up, scaling up, the chances are very good that in that 100 people, you're going to have 25 A's, 50 B's, and 25 C's. So it's a real struggle, if you can imagine, and we all appreciate, if 75% of the company is not quite getting it. You know, they're really struggling. They're not able to deliver. Time is wasted, money is wasted. It's exhausting and stressful. So the good news is there's a much better way, but this is what folks will typically average out there. What we're after, as you probably know, is 75 to 90% success rate in hiring, managing, and promoting. So by the way, everything we discuss here today also applies to internal promotions. That's something that is sometimes missed when we think about top grading. But clearly, if you've got 75 to 90% A's, you're going to perform better, make more money, have great reputations in the market. But my personal favorite, and that's why it's bolded, you know, as a COO and as a, you know, an organizational decision maker, I want to experience less strain, less pain and stress. That's my favorite. Because if you've got people problems or just business problems coming to you day in, day out, and you're not able to delegate and get more help, it's just not necessary. There's a better way to grow and a much easier way to succeed, but it does start with getting the right people in the right seats. So I don't want to preach too much to the choir here, but I am personally delighted to share that moving from that 25% A to 75, 90% A is actually quite doable within a year and a half or two. It doesn't take forever. The smaller the company, the faster you can do it. But again, must be done at a pace that works for the company and your clients. The last thing that we want to do is introduce a huge disruption. So we'll talk a little bit about how to avoid that kind of disruption today. All right, quick reminder on definitions. When we think about an A player, we're very simply talking about a high performer or someone that has potential to become a high performer or an A player within 6 to 12 months. Now, one of the myths out there when folks are kind of new to top grading or who is that an A player means you have to be promoted all the time. And that's simply not true. You can have someone great, you know, just great fit for the role, doing super good work, and they can stay in that role as an A player for quite some time, no problem. Now, some companies also look at these levels A1, 2, and 3, and that's a great process to have, especially with regards to succession planning. So being aware of who might be ready to be promoted one or two levels, or, you know, here, as you can see, A1, who might be promotable 2+ levels and could be, let's say in 3-4 years time, or even further, an executive that you want to develop to lead the company someday. At a minimum though, we want to have A, B, and C, okay? And B are those folks that are struggling. They might have disappointing results. It might just be as simple as a learning curve. They were recently promoted. They need more time. They need more coaching. They need more feedback. But C players or C performers are those that are really not fit either for culture or the productivity that you need in the company. So another way to look at this is to think about the quadrant, which I'm sure many of us are familiar with. You know, on the one hand, you need to have folks that are living your values, they get the culture, they embrace the culture. And on the other hand, you need to have results and productivity. So we clearly want both, a lot of it. So when you think about the A players, often, not always, you know, very little supervision is required. They're able to do 2-3 times the work of others. Now, that doesn't mean burning people out. That just means they have a lot of initiative. They're resourceful, they're intelligent, they're just in the right place at the right time. And so they've got capacity to deliver quite a bit more than your B and C players naturally. They tend to also solve their own problems and take more initiative. So when we think about a B player, on the other hand, they might be a great cultural fit, but they're not quite delivering the results that the company is after. Often this is a space that is coachable, so long as you believe they have the right competencies and the motivation, the intellectual horsepower as well, to move into that potential A or that A place, that A position over time. I have hired what I would call chronic B players in the past. And by the way, the only reason I can share so much of what we're covering today is I've made massively bad hiring mistakes over the years. Thank goodness that's improved dramatically since I became a coach, but still happens. But as a COO, I hired a lovely guy, but he was a chronic B player general manager. And I projected my hopes and beliefs that he would magically turn into an A player. And we struggled for 2 years. So some of these lessons almost require going through the pain on your own or helping your client go through some of these challenges until the light comes on and you realize, I'm never going to do this again. I will not do this a chronic B player hiring again. You know, and you just get better and better at making some tough decisions. Another point I want to make here, coaches, is that we're never talking about good or bad people. We're talking about your ability or your client's ability to make great hiring decisions and great promotion decisions. So it's never about the person, it's about the leadership's ability to make informed, high quality decisions. Then you have our C players, which, you know, on the end of the extreme, they tend to be pretty obvious in the organization. They're not a fit on values or culture. They're really not delivering, and they just have no real business being in the company unless you can get them into a different role where they can shine. And that certainly happens, not that often, but it can happen. The real stickler to be careful of, though, is what we call the toxic A. And that's someone that may be delivering fantastic results, like just hitting it out of the park, but they're really not good with the team. They don't give a lot of credence or support to your culture, your client's culture and values. And that's a bad situation for your other A players and those high potentials that want to move into the A player space. So that's an area to really keep an eye on, because we talk a lot about hiring for culture and values. And I actually can't stress that enough. When we look at some other tools here in a second and talk about competencies, many of the competencies that are related to culture and values are often competencies that are very difficult to change, like integrity, likability, energy, drive, passion, tenacity, all these things, intelligence. They're very, very difficult to coach and to change. And often they relate to a great deal of the values that we see out there that people aspire to have living and breathing in their company. So
Michelle, can I ask you a question? Can I ask you a question? Why do you call them a toxic A? I mean, in our framework, we call them the B/C.
It's a good question. It's brought up a lot. You'll see it in the WHO book. I believe you'll see it there. And we call it toxic because even if someone's delivering great results, if they are not demonstrating your values and your culture, it becomes kind of poisonous or toxic. It throws a wrench into the engine of your desire to grow this amazing company that shares your values. Yeah. So I'll put it another way. If you allow someone delivering great results to be a terrible, let's just give you a specific example, arrogant, condescending, kind of jerky person with the rest of the team, that's going to deflate your other A players who are living your values. And it's going to cause some real questions or lack of confidence with folks when any leader is trying to improve culture or to keep culture strong. but the toxic A player over here is allowed to get away with everything. So it
So
almost becomes an integrity question.
they're an A player because they're getting results, but they're toxic because they don't live the values, and they have a, there's lots of cleaning up lots of messes after them.
That's right. Right. That's right. And here I'd also point out with that reminder, Ken, that A players want to work with other A players, and if we have too many B and C players or toxic A players, you run the risk of losing your real champions, your real A players, because the culture starts to fall apart or the confidence in leadership starts to wane. Yeah, good question. Okay, so hiring quickly and firing slowly is a really, really bad strategy. Now, we could probably spend the whole hour on how to calculate the cost of a mishire. We could easily spend a whole hour talking about, mishires and examples of tragic, situations that hold the company back, or all kinds of stuff. But I want to be sure that we at least capture some of the basics. And that is, you're going to look at, with a mishire, anywhere between double the yearly salary up to 15, 27 times the yearly base salary, depending on the seniority of the role. The other day, I did a cost of mishire exercise with a leader, and we calculated it was 27 times the yearly base salary, and it was for a middle manager. So these are very conservative averages, but we look at the cost of the mishire not only from financial loss, but also the time wasted, which is approximately 260 on the average hours per employer per manager. And I've personally experienced this. I'm sure many on the line have experienced this or seen it, but it's important to realize that we're talking about a 25% success rate in hiring. All right. So if you're only hiring at a 25% success rate, you have to hire 4 people to get 1 A player. That's insane. I mean, that's a huge cost just right there with the churn and the burn that you have because we're not getting the right people the first time out. You also have to look at, salary lost, time lost, contracts that may be lost, clients that could be lost, A players that are lost, again, because A players don't want to work with an organization that may have too many B's and C's. But it's really that stress and that exhaustion, the hours that are wasted as well. When I brought up the general manager that I hired back in the days that turned out to be a chronic B player, not only did we lose time, we lost about 1.5 years of our strategic execution because we were growing so fast. I didn't have time to do my real job. I ended up having to let that manager go and take over his job, which set us back in even further. So it's almost a snowball effect, especially at the senior leadership level, no doubt, but equally at your front line. We may not have time today for this full story, but a very quick story. I had a dishwasher in a restaurant years ago, and we calculated her cost of mishire at 48 times her yearly base salary because she wasn't able to follow our safety standards. And she was coached and asked and begged to follow our safety standards. She should have been let go a long time before, but our managers felt, and I am responsible too, I should have insisted, they felt at the time it was too hard to find a replacement. We just don't have time. We can't find anybody. Long story short, ended up sending 4 employees to the hospital one night, lost an entire restaurant of customers. I'm probably exaggerating a bit. We lost 60% of our customers one night, had to compensate all kinds of checks, had all kinds of hospital bills because of a safety issue. Now, our employees were fine in the end, but if you can imagine a boiling pot of water landing on somebody's feet in the middle of a busy Friday restaurant and what that could have done to somebody, it was not good. So I just want to bring that up. And thankfully, everybody was fine, of course, but we're not just talking about senior leaders here. We're talking about every person in the company. And those folks that are closer to your customers are going to have just as much, if not more impact than folks that are in the corporate office. So if you want to learn more or help your clients with understanding how to complete a mishire calculation, There's a link on the topgrading.com site under resources. You'll find a calculator. And the last thing I'll say here is this is an important area to help executives get on board, for them to understand the impact and the cost. However, sometimes it takes getting bitten to really have the light bulbs go on and say, we're never doing this again. We're just not, if in doubt, do not hire. So with that little setup, I want to switch gears and go into some of the top 6 things that I like to share that can help yours or your clients' success when hiring, promoting the right people. And the first one relates back to what we covered with Peter Drucker, and that's measure. Start measuring, and there's lots of different ways to do this, but we call this a talent review. Once a quarter, sitting down quietly in a reflective fashion, very much confidentially, and reflecting on who are my A's, my PA's, my B's, and my C's. Thinking about who, knowing what I know today, would I enthusiastically rehire? And who might I have some question marks around? Are they in the right job at the right time? Is there another job that they might be able to do and become an A player? But you want to make a simple action plan that includes, who do I need to make sure that I'm supporting and ensuring that they don't leave? I like to call this wrapping your arms around your A players and taking your best care of them, especially in tough markets and hot markets out there. Who needs some coaching, to get into that A player space within the next 6 to 12 months? And who might need to move to a different role, or in fact, move out of the organization to be happier and more successful somewhere else? This kind of simple exercise will help you and your client figure out what positions might be coming up. What are the priorities that we need to be looking at? And I tend to keep this in a spreadsheet so that you can have left to right, name, title, department, how long they've been with the company, what is their rating, A, B, or C, knowing what you know about them today. Would you enthusiastically rehire? Are they a fit for the role? Are they a fit for culture? So there's all kinds of stuff that you can put in this sheet, but the key is to review people quarterly and make sure that you're getting your measurements so that you can hold each other, your other leaders and managers, accountable to make progress from one quarter to the next. All right, so that's the first most important step when you're getting ready to top grade. It's called top grading for a lot of reasons, but it is top down. And if you've got, or your client has, a management team with 60% B and C players, that's where they need to start first. Because top grading will not work if there's a lot of blockers at that leadership level. Ken, did you have any comments or question there before I move on?
Yeah, I'm just going to ask you, based on your experience, how hard of an exercise is this for leadership teams to do a talent review on their clients, or on their staff?
It's not, great question. Thank you. It's not hard, the exercise or the activity itself. What is difficult is getting the commitment to do it and making it a habit to do it once a quarter. For whatever reason, and unfortunately, the people discussion part of the strategic plan tends to get, my words, blown off a bit and scooted on down the line. So I think if the commitment is there, the exercise itself is pretty straightforward. The only thing being that it's important to have the same definitions, that everyone can calibrate against one standard set of definitions for A, B, and C.
And then to develop an action plan in terms of how you're going to work with your C players and how you can coach your B players too, right? And then following through on that.
Correct. Exactly. That's the challenge, to get that commitment going. But again, with most of our stellar clients and folks out there, it's not a blocker per se. It's just the commitment to get it on the calendar, stick to it, keep making progress, and it gets easier and easier over time. Mm-hmm. Cool. So once you have a talent review, the second tool, and I'm just keeping an eye on time here, is what we call a job scorecard. And we're actually sharing a sample, and we'll look at a sample here in a second, of a vice president of finance. But a job scorecard allows you to capture actual objectives and expectations as well as competencies. There is no way to successfully assess a candidate, keyword successfully, without a job scorecard. Otherwise, we're back to kind of voodoo hiring, where there's no job description, we're not doing proper interviews, we're not doing proper reference checks. So we really need a document that captures the mission for the role in simple language, 5 to 7 key accountabilities that are measurable. You can call these KPIs, you can call them SMART objectives, but you think about this, if nothing else happens on the job, what actually must happen in order to be considered an A player in the role? And we'll look at a sample of that. And then you set minimal competency requirements. Let me see if I can switch over really quick here. Give me 1 second to switch. Okay. Let's see if I can pull this up for everybody. Can we see this okay, Ken?
Yep.
Okay. So this is the sample that we're going to share with everyone, and it's for a Vice President of Finance reporting to the President. There's a job purpose captured here in very simple language. There's a list of responsibilities, which is good to have for sure. But more important, we want to capture what must happen on this job in the next year or two in order to be, in that A player space. So this is what I mean. Instead of remembering a huge laundry list of responsibilities, I'm going to remember that my leader, my president, needs me to get cash flow projections presented with 99% accuracy and delivered by 2 p.m. every Tuesday. Bam, that's clear. I need to get cash conversion days improved from 10 to 8 by the end of this year. Or I need to get accounts receivable improving from 48 to 35 by the end of this year. So this is what we mean by having objectives or priorities. And it's highly complementary with everything we discuss in the execution space of 4 decisions. Really is just very much aligned with taking that strategic plan, cascading it down by quarter, or cascading it down to different departments for alignment and capturing it here. The recruiting points are also great to have. If we've got them, that's awesome. But the last part about the job scorecard that I want to throw out there that's critical, and by the way, this is my all-time favorite tool, is this color-coded competency sheet. This is directly related to the 50 critical competencies in Topgrading. That's where this comes from. And so everything that you see there in red is very difficult to change. Everything in yellow is harder to change but doable. And everything in green is easier to change or to coach along the way, like most management. Now, these are hard-coded based on Brad and Jeff Smart's work years ago. And I have found this to be so incredibly accurate and consistent all these many years that I've been using it. So what we like to do is, especially for supervisor level and above, we want to have on a scale of 1 to 5, whereby 5 is excellent and 1 is poor, what is the minimal level of competency that I need for this VP of Finance with regards to analytical skills, strategic skills? What do I need on management? And what do I need on leadership? Now, these requirements can be set and should be set not only based on position, but also everything else that's going on around this VP of Finance. For example, the VP of Finance may be reporting to a president that is not that strategic. He's more of a innovation ideas guy. He's doing an awesome job, but he's not an analytical finance strategic planner or leader. And so he needs or she needs to hire someone that brings real strength in these areas. So the minimal requirements that you see here are set not for what we wish to have, but what we must have to be successful. I'm going to pop back over to the PowerPoint really quick and just clarify. Yeah, go ahead.
That competency chart, is there a place where can we down that online from the the Topgrading website?
It's not on the Topgrading website, but I have shared that VP of Finance sample with you, and I believe we're getting it out to all the coaches afterwards.
Yeah, no, the scorecard, but this chart that you've got right here with the competencies, can we get a copy of that as well?
Yeah, it's in the scorecard that I sent.
Okay,
yeah,
good.
Yeah, it's editable in that Word document. So when we get that out to everybody, you'll see purpose, responsibilities, accountabilities, recruiting points, this color-coded template, and then there's actually a final little template towards the end where you can capture interview feedback and stuff.
Awesome.
But yeah, no, I love this tool, you guys. It has really helped a lot of people, and myself included, avoid bad hires. And here's the thing, and this kind of brings it back to values. So energy, drive, passion, ambition, vision, inspiring others, tenacity, excellence, likability, independence, resourceful initiative, stress management, all kinds of stuff in here, intelligence, integrity. These are areas that I often see defined or captured by companies when they're defining their values and their culture, and they're all red and yellow. So the candidate has to bring the right amount to the job or the company, or you're going to find yourself in a situation that's very hard to coach. Whereas, and by the way, let me just back up and put a placeholder around this. Once you set minimal requirements, what you're trying to do is post-interview or with on-the-job experience, rate the candidate or rate the employee against your requirements, okay? Now, again, we're not talking good or bad people. We're just talking about their readiness for this job. On the scale of 1 to 5, a 3 is your average college graduate for intelligence, okay? So the point is, you can use this post-interview to clarify, do we think they're a really great fit? And if so, is there anywhere that might be do we have gaps anywhere that we should be paying attention to? In this case, we've got several that are all in the areas that are red and yellow. That right there is definitely a mishire. There's too much coaching involved in this one gap analysis alone. So if there are too many gaps, you're likely going to mishire. Gaps that are in areas that are easy to change, like experience, communication skills, self-awareness, again, most management, organization and planning. These are areas that it's okay to bet on. If you've got people that can coach, or if your client has people that are ready to coach and mentor, it's not a problem. It's just more about those areas that are hard-coded red that you need to be very mindful of. Do you or does your client have time to coach on the gaps? So 2 recaps on this. 1, the job scorecard is very well used if you've got a minimal competency requirement as well. And once you have that defined with your client, then you can come out post-interview and assess your candidate and make a much more informed decision. Secondly, you can use this competency assessment to also analyze or assess how someone's doing on the team today. And this is so important to me personally, because especially in the entrepreneurial world or, the fast-paced growth world, often performance management is missing, and giving and receiving feedback is missing. Leadership training is missing. It may be there, but it might be an afterthought. And so if we've identified that someone is a B or C player, we've got to first identify where's the gap, what's missing, not necessarily what's wrong, and be sure that leaders have done a good job to sit down with them and say, hey, Michelle, do you realize that when you do this, it has this impact? And what we're really looking for is this over here and not this priority over here. And give them a chance to step up, because too often they simply may not know. And excuse me, once we give them some feedback, they might rise to the occasion. So one of my favorite tools, again, I don't want to go too far down the path of it, but if you guys have any questions post-webinar, just give me a shout. Happy to share more on this if you have any questions later. Kim, before I move on, was there anything else on this section you wanted to?
I think, and let me just share a brief story. I mean, fit is really important here. So our daughter was in high school and she wanted to get a job. And I had a friend of mine who owned a Pizza Hut Express. And so I said, hey, do you need any staff? And she said, yeah, I do. So my daughter went in and applied. And after she applied, she was diagnosed with ADD. And one day I'm in there and I told this friend of mine, I said, look, don't treat her any differently because she's my daughter. But she said, I was in there one day and she said, Ken, it's not working. And I said, well, she was just diagnosed with ADD. So what would happen is she'd be working on making a pizza. The phone would ring. She'd pick up the phone and she'd forget about the pizza. And it's all about productivity in that kind of an environment, right? And so, my friend said, we're going to have to let her go. I said, you do that, we'll be fine. And so, my daughter was devastated. So I said to her, I said, if you could do any job, what job would you like? And she said, well, I'd like to work in this junior department store. I said, well, why don't you talk to the school, see if they'll, let you do work experience there. So the school contacted this junior department store and said, we've got a student who'd like to do work experience. Would you take her on? Sure. She was there 2 weeks. And you know what they said to her? They said, we're going to hire you because you are so good at this. But she found a fit. Her creative side come out, and somebody with ADD needs that space for the end. You know, in her other job, she was a C player, but in this one, she was an A player because it was a fit. You know, and I mean, that, you know, being really careful on the competencies and, you know, and being rigid on that and inflexible on that and saying, we can't, you know, we just can't bend on this because there's so much riding on it. So no, this is a great chart.
Well, good. No, I really like it. It's helped myself, as I said, and many folks make just a better decision for everybody, because I mean, the whole point with top grading is to slow down long enough, be organized enough that you can make better decisions, because we are talking about people's lives and families' lives here. You know, before you bring someone on, we want to be sure that both parties are set up for success. So again, give me a shout anytime if you have questions, guys. And thank you, Ken, for sharing that story. That's an excellent story to share. Spot on.
Well, and I mean, my daughter was miserable at the Pizza Hut Express, but she thrived in the job in the junior department store because she could be at her best, right?
Exactly. That's awesome. No, that's a win-win. That is great. Very cool.
Okay, back to you.
Thank you. No, thank you, Ken. So the next quick one, I won't spend a lot of time on this one, but it is so critical, and that's the ability for people to recruit through their A-player networks. Another, you know, brainstorming exercise that you can think about using with your clients, because this problem comes up a lot, and that's the talent pipeline. We don't know how to find people. We don't know where they are. Our postings are not working. We're not having great results with recruiters. And much like the commitment to make time for those quarterly talent reviews, once you can get your clients to make a commitment around discussing and measuring their recruiting activities through networks, you will be amazed at how things change. It is incredible. It's another one of those things that I love about top grading, because it just works. And what we're talking about here is having your or I should say, put a placeholder in the calendar once a week, at least once a month, and look at how we're doing to get the referrals improving for the company. Preferably, this would be part of a huddle, a daily or weekly huddle. How many referrals did we get? How many postings have we made? So there's all kinds of different ways to use this, but at a minimum, if your clients are not doing this yet, please work with them to identify who individually. So this sheet right here, for example, could be used with every individual on the leadership team. Who are the people in their A-player network, inside or outside of the company? And who are their connectors? Who are the top 5 or 10 people that they know, like my buddy Charlie in Asia, who just knows everybody. He's absolutely a connector. I mean, he's one of those folks that just knows what everyone is doing all the time and watches the movement and just thrives on connecting people. And so he's one of mine. I reach out to him all the time, as well as many others. So it's a very simple practice, but it's a habit of spending time to talk about and measure the percentage of internal referrals, or the number of referrals that you're getting from your networks, and to work with your clients to build habits that get them into a space where they're comfortable to pick up the phone, to email, to keep their eyes peeled, when they're out socially, at a restaurant or at a hotel. It's just a beautiful practice that will absolutely change the way in which A players are coming to the company. So I'm going to pause there and see if we have any questions on this one.
No questions coming up there, but I can imagine that this would be something easy that you could do to really kind of improve your hiring success, right?
It is so easy. It's just it's like from the multipliers book or many other best practices we've seen out there. The more you ask, the faster you find. What's interesting about this one, though, is a lot of leaders are not comfortable doing this. And so I think they need encouragement to post and call and email and or if some other team members are not comfortable, being able to encourage them that it's okay. So I just find this one fascinating because once you start doing it, it's a game changer. But many executives, even very successful people, are kind of hesitant to reach out. They feel a little bit awkward or like they shouldn't be. So I just would encourage all coaches to take a look at this and see how the referrals are going with your clients. And again, reach out if you have any questions.
Well, and tapping into your A-player network and saying to your A players, who do you know who's like you, who,
Yeah,
may be looking for a job transition who would be a good fit here. you
exactly,
know,
exactly. That's
your A
that's exactly
players already have a positive impact on the culture, and so using them
yeah,
as, kind of a recruiting tool as well.
that's right. That's just it. All right. Again, keep an eye on time. I know we're covering quite a bit, but I'll
Yeah.
press forward so we have plenty of time for questions. So then the big magic wand inside of Top Grading is conducting a great interview. There's 2 interviews actually. Well, there's 3, but there's a few we're gonna
Before we
cover
go
today.
to this, before we
Yeah.
go to this, there's one question that's come up. How far down in the organization do you suggest the referral exercise be done? So how far down, kind of the, the kind of the into the.
We encourage everybody. All levels of the organization should be referring. And the second part of that question is usually, well, what if I've got C players referring? Well, we know that we need to work on that in a separate process, but we don't want anyone to be discouraged from referring. It
Yeah.
shouldn't be a shaming process either. I just had this conversation with a client the other day where people stopped referring because their candidates weren't getting through. And therefore they weren't getting the reward, which was a sizable reward, like $5,000 for having a referral hired. And so they started feeling almost ashamed because their candidates weren't good enough. So it's a great question. We encourage the whole organization to get involved, for there to be a nice reward system combined to it. It doesn't always have to be money, but to make a referral program really work, you need champions or cheerleaders inside the leadership team and your people and culture team. They're going to keep it positive and keep encouraging folks and not make it about, well, your candidate wasn't good, you know what I mean? So that was a great.
Like you said, it's not whether or not they're good people, it's whether or not they're the right fit, right?
Yeah. Cool. Okay, so interviews. There's a screening interview that lasts on the average 30 to 60 minutes, even for mid-managers. Often 60 to 90 minutes is more than enough to do even a very senior level executive. And by the way, the screening interview questions and the top grading interview questions, they're all going to be in either the top grading book or the WHO book. So check those resources out there. But your screening interview is your first chance to determine fit for culture and role. Especially that screening interview, if you're conducting it, you should leave that interview excited. If you're not, do not go to the next step. If you leave a screening interview and you're bored, depressed, anxious, exhausted, that's not a good sign. So you can just conclude on a positive note, thank your candidate, later, before, at the end of the call, of course, but you can let them know your decision later. You don't need to let them know a decision, and should not on the spot, out of courtesy. But keep an eye on how you're feeling at the end of these interviews. Once we collect all kind of data, we've got all kinds of examples and information, but we always want to go back to our gut, because if we have any doubt, 99% chance that we should not be hiring. Once you've done the screening interview, then we do a proper structured or chronological top grading interview. Some folks call this a deep dive. There's lots of different ways that we can capture this type of interview, but we are literally walking step by step by step through their work experience. And there's plenty of flexibility in the time spent and how many years you review, depending on your candidate. But this is one of the reasons why I wanted to really bring this up, is often folks will say, oh, top grading, that means we have to interview people for 7 hours. And that's not the case at all. I spend most of my time interviewing mid to very senior level executives and managers. You'd be amazed at how much you can learn in just an hour. So with practice and partnership and giving each other feedback, if you're conducting these interviews, you'll get better and better at getting specific information, enough information from the top grading interview that you can then go back to that competency sheet and assess accurately. You can see here that an executive, you might need 5 to 8 hours. That for me happens maybe once or twice a year max. It's really not that often that you need that much time. Again, with an hour and a half to 3 hours, you can literally cover about 25 years of experience with practice. Okay. Just briefly, the typical or traditional interview questions that we want to get rid of and away from are hypothetical. How do you demonstrate? How would you handle? What are your strengths and weaknesses? They're behavior-based or hypothetical. They're what would you do if? Tell me about a time when. Still nice questions, but they're not getting us to the real work experience or the real information that's going to allow us to confirm a cultural fit. So highly encourage you all to, if you don't have who, get the book, study the questions, or get Topgrading, learn these questions, the right questions, or reach out to me if you need any help, because a big part of changing the ability to hire accurately is to throw out all of the questions that we've learned in the past. Unless you're asking questions like, in this period, what was your biggest accomplishment? What was your biggest challenge? And who are you reporting to? And what is his or her name? And will she be able for a reference call should we need it? Great. And when I speak with her, what will she tell me about your strengths and any areas to improve back then? We're positioning questions in a way that allows us to get real factual information. So I look forward to hearing from anyone that may already be trying Topgrading interviews, or their clients are thinking about doing Topgrading. Just reach out to me anytime if I can be of any service. But the questions are the books. You can ask these, do what we call dig deep, not leaving a question until you can clearly articulate what was the accomplishment, what was the strength about, what was the challenge, who, what, when, where, why, how long, how fast, how slow, so that you can then go back and rate accurately. You may have heard of TORC before. I kind of alluded to it just then. It's the threat of reference check. And it sounds like this. So will Michelle be available for a reference call? Should we need it? Yes. Great. And when I speak with Michelle, what will she share regarding your strengths in any areas to improve back then? It's a much better question than what would you say are your strengths and weaknesses. Now, without sounding overly skeptical, but when interviewing, we need to stay friendly and skeptical. If we're asking, just, hey, Michelle, what would you say are your strengths and weaknesses? I might not share everything that is actually valid for the job or related to the job, or I could share anything I want and you don't know if it's true or not, right? So if I'm asking what my boss will share, instead, put your candidate in that perspective, you're going to get a much better opinion and lots more information about what really could be happening or has happened on the job with regards to those skill sets. So it's one question, if nothing else, that if people will start asking differently, you'll get such better results, because with A players, you really can talk to anybody you want. There's very, very, very little hesitancy or hesitation about you talking with their previous bosses. With B players, you're going to start to hear, not sure, they left the country, I don't know, they resigned, hard to find them, tried to find them a couple years ago, couldn't, kind of difficult. You see a little bit of stress, or you hear a little bit of stress in their voice. With C players, all kinds of tragedy has taken place there. They may not be on the planet, they may be Lord knows where, but they're often not alive. And again, this, as funny as it may sound, is so consistent out there. It's one of those patterns that just really helps us make better decisions, because we're not talking about one time where they may not be comfortable with you talking to a previous leader. I'm sure all of us have had not so great managers along the way, or colleagues that we simply don't get on that well with. That's not a problem. It's the consistency. Let's say you're interviewing somebody that has 15, 20 years experience, and every time you ask about speaking with the previous boss, you get the not sure, maybe kind of difficult. Whereas A players will tend to be very transparent and open. You can go anywhere you want in the conversation and they'll go with you. Now I'm going to move ahead and cover just a couple more things so we have time for questions. When you're interviewing, some of the red flags, and again, this is a lot from the WHO book, that you really need to be careful of is a candidate that's consistently making destructive comments about others, negative, blaming others, making excuses. Often we call this throwing people under the bus. Or you can hear or experience in the interview that there's an excessive need to be me, which is kind of an ego problem. They come off as condescending or arrogant. So pay attention to that, because that's a major red flag. if they're not very engaging or not very interested or easily deflated during the interview, that's also something to be mindful of. And then finally, if the conversation is difficult, if you're struggling to get good information, pay attention to that, because with A players, these interviews should be pretty darn easy. And the time goes by quickly. You're able to get all kinds of data. It's a joy to interview A players. So I just wanted to throw those out there. And finally, having a tandem partner when you're top grading is just, makes it all so much easier. And if your clients are not doing this today, whether it's yourself as a coach or someone else, just by having a partner sit with them or be on the phone with them to help them conduct the interviews, guaranteed their hiring success will improve from 25% to 50% immediately. Having a partner help you ask the questions, stay friendly, dig deep for facts, take lots of notes. It's just amazing. So think about, encouraging your clients to have a tandem partner, and they'll start seeing amazing results. It'll be pretty cool. So this is what we've covered today. Measure your hiring and promotion success, that talent review, get your job scorecards out there. You've got one to work with already. You're free to use that as a template. Reach out to me with any questions. Talk to your clients about how they recruit through their A-player network, how they measure it. Tandem interviewing will boost their success by 25% overnight. Watch out for red flags, and then use those minimal competencies we looked at to not only assess external talent, but to also help your clients with anyone that might be struggling in the company today. And with that, I'm going to turn it back over to Ken so that we have some time for any questions that may be out there.
Yeah, so coaches, if you have any questions, just type them into the chat box and I'll convey them to Michelle. But while we're waiting for questions, there's none right now, Michelle. So outside of top grading, tell us a little bit about Michelle the person.
Okay, thanks. Well, I'm originally from Kansas City, Missouri. I went to college in Northeast Missouri State in Kirksville, and I ended up studying Chinese there, and I fell in love with it. So when I graduated college, I went straight to China and taught English out in the middle of the countryside. That pretty much blew my mind, and loved it. So ended up getting a job with Microsoft at a young age, 1997, and worked and lived in Asia for about 20 years. My Chinese is much better than my Spanish these days, but I moved to Chile about 9 years ago. And so when I'm not busy working on top grading or working with clients around the world, I'm trying to get a little farm going here. So I've got a personal use farm, not a commercial farm, but I've got 2 horses, 4 dogs, 30 chickens, and I might be getting some goats, not this year, but next.
And you've got quite an adventurous side to you as well, right?
Yeah, no, I like adventure. I like to travel and try new things for sure.
Well, and I remember because we connected before this webinar, we were part of the community together. You were a TV star as well.
Yeah.
You were on a House Hunters episode, exactly. Right?
Yeah, that was a lot of fun. House Hunters International came down and sort of recreated my move from China to Chile. That was fun.
That's cool. So, Michelle, one of our core values is abundance. How can we as Gravitas Premium Coaches help you?
Abundance. Gosh, I remember talking about that years ago. That's funny. Abundance. I think that, as far as the coaches go and helping each other out, I think my one ask would be get in touch with any questions you might have. Top grading is not difficult, but when you're new to it, it can be a little bit tricky using some of these tools. So I think to help me and also help you, just get in touch with any questions that you might have along the way. I really enjoy sharing pointers where I can and where I have expertise because I'm just so passionate about getting people right.
You don't have a problem if we circulate your contact information through the community?
Not at all. Please do. Yep.
So there's one question that's come in. Michael Langhout is asking, he says, can you coach us a bit on how to get the client away from asking behavioral questions? They're using screening interviews and tandems, but are still asking the behavioral questions. And it kind of stuck in an old paradigm, it sounds like, right? The traditional HR paradigm.
Yeah, well, my great question, and a couple things come to mind. If you have the Who book and you have those questions from the book, I would encourage you to demonstrate for them just how different the content and the information you'll get, how different it is when you ask better questions. And to coach them that those hypothetical questions or behavior-based questions, truly the candidate can say whatever they want and you don't know if it's factual. We have to go into what they've actually done. Another idea is to reach out to me or other top grading coaches and just let us run one of the screening interviews for your client, so that we can show them the difference as well. Because that's really where the light bulbs come on, when we're in there and we can demonstrate the difference, and then to coach the client afterwards on what they learned. So, and I'll add to that, that great question. Much of what's in the Who and top grading, I mean, I didn't have a coach back in the day. I've been using it for years and years and years, but a lot of it, you just have to start and practice. And it's really about the practice. You get better and better and better and better. But the key is to stick to the questions and get curious about your answers. Get in there and confirm, what does that answer mean? I'll give you a very quick example. And that is, you might ask a candidate, what were you most proud of in college? And the candidate says, well, I won the President's Award. Most of us would leave it there, but we have no idea what that means. And so we want to pull back the layers and say, well, now that sounds great. And how many students were in your class? About 200. And I'm curious, how many students received the President's Award? Oh, about 98%. In fact, everybody was kind of expected to get it. Oh, gotcha. Okay, that makes sense to me now. Right. So,
that
you got
it sounds like but when 98% are getting the President's Award, it suddenly puts it in a different perspective.
Exactly.
Okay, well, we're close to the top of the hour. Just coaches, for your information, Michelle will be in Vancouver, October 29th and 30th, doing a top grading workshop with Kevin Lawrence, who's one of our Gravitas coaches. And so, if you're interested in, kind of finding out more about that, I mean, connect with Michelle or Kevin, and I'm sure they'll have the information, and they'd love to have you join them if you're interested in going more in depth with the top grading certification. So, Michelle, Thank you so much.
You're welcome.
Comments are coming back. Great presentation. And I'm not surprised because I know what you deliver. So thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you. And thank you all that joined. Really appreciate it and happy to be with you today. Have a wonderful, amazing weekend out there.
Yeah. And coaches, Michaela will be getting posting the downloads and the video of this on the Yammer group. So watch for that. And and we'll get you Michelle's contact information as well, so that you know how to reach out to her. And great presentation. Thanks again, Michelle.
Sounds good, you guys. Take good care.
Okay, thanks.
Bye.
Bye.